everyone. By way of introduction, my name is Lindsay Grossman, and I lead global public policy at Intuit. Intuit is a global technology company that makes software ranging from accounting software to payroll to payments, basically everything that an entrepreneur or a small business needs to run their financial lives. And at the company, I interface a lot with governments and try to sit at the table and work with governments around the world to say, how can we create a better entrepreneurship climate for startups and small businesses? And then also deal a lot with the fun stuff like privacy and cybersecurity that you would expect as a global cloud provider. I think this is an issue that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and the question is, what's the role of government in helping startups grow? It's a philosophical question because I ask this of startups a lot, I ask it of government a lot, and everyone has a different answer about what that role is. Some people say that the role of government is to remove barriers and to purely get out of the way. Some startups will say, I want nothing to do with government. They slow things down. They think and they breathe and they live completely different than I do as an entrepreneur. And then I think others would say, look, in order to promote economic growth, let's say, and especially in emerging economies, it is the role of government to invite entrepreneurs and to give them access to investment and to really fuel that. And so that's a discussion that I'm really eager to have today with the panelists, but also with all the startups in the room. So with that said, I also do want to thank the organizers. I think Level 39 has just done an awesome job of building a community around financial tech, inviting the right players. Obviously, the Global Innovation Forum is a new global forum that's trying to attract people across the world to talk about the digital economy issues. And so thanks to them, and of course, Fried Frank, who just do a fantastic job in promoting and helping entrepreneurs expand. So with that said, the other kind of housekeeping items that I do want to say is I don't want to wait until the end to ask questions from the audience. So you might hear me be a little bit of an aggressive American and pointing out some of the startups that I know are here in the room because they have fantastic experience. And so the other thing that I'll say is we'll have a hard stop at 12:15 so that we can get lunch before our keynote. So with that said, what's exciting about this panel is we've got two people who live and breathe the goals inside of government to support entrepreneurs, right? That's Keith and John here. And then we've got two people on the receiving end of rules and regulations, and that's the entrepreneurs themselves. So I want to first start with the government side. Keith, you're a Tech City advisor and, coming from UKTI, and you have an interesting role because you're really helping the UK government rethink how they deliver services to startups.
I like to think.
Yeah. And so I want to ask, in your experience, what government services are most interesting to startups today? How is UKTI thinking differently about approaching this community, including the technology startup community?
Thank you. By way of context, I read a piece recently that said that nearly 40% of the funds that are pumped into European VCs last year came from government-sponsored sources. That's up from about 14% in 2007. What that clearly demonstrates is that European countries, including the UK, are highly invested in startups in a way that is probably not the case across the pond. That obviously invites Reagan's quip about the 9 most terrifying words in the English language. I won't go into that, for now. But the real issue here is the extent and nature of market failure across Europe, which leads to that level of intervention, and the extent to which that investment, including in some of the programs we'll talk about today, is nurturing success. I doubt very much if we have time to go into some of the details, but I thought it useful to highlight market failure as an overarching theme when it comes to government intervention. So the context for UKTI's intervention is economic in scope. It's about wealth creation. It's about jobs. But crucially in response to market failure. I know that the tech landscape is changing rapidly, across the UK, including London, with people like Dan, John Bradford, Ellen Burbidge, expanding capacity for supporting, startups, and I expect that over time, the government will be forced to withdraw, to the margins. But from my perspective, the most used government programs are SEIS, that's a Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, R&D tax credits, and the research and development funding available through Innovate UK. UKTI programs are well received by startups that experience them, and I think that is the key sort of factor there. One clear aim is for the programs, for UKTI programs, to be in the same bracket as SEIS in terms of usage. Given the fact that most startups are global from the outset, I think we need to make sure that startups make use of UKTI programs as much as possible. The SEIS, if I just maybe dwell on SEIS for a moment, SEIS has been a boon, I think, to the ecosystem, to both startups and investors. I think there are very few negative things to say about it, save potentially for the dilution, I think, of the quality of investment through sort of commoditization of early stage capital. But I think the upside is that commoditization is forcing early stage VCs to sort of up their game and offer more value to their portfolio companies. You would expect me to say this, of course, but I would say that UKTI is making a good effort at being accessible and relevant to startups, and I think there are a few startups here that have come across me that can vouch for that. I won't name any names, but I see familiar faces in the audience. I think it's doing many of the right things. I think it has good people on the whole who are engaged, accessible, and are making the right connections. And also helping to sort of demystify the system, because I think from the outside, an agency like UKTI can seem sort of impenetrable. So you have committed people across the network that are helping to sort of demystify that. There are challenges, of course, and I think the challenges in the main are to do with the globally distributed nature of UKTI, which potentially can impede its focus and the necessary deepening of sort of sector knowledge that we need to possess to be credible, to startups. So briefly, I think essentially what UK Trade and Investment is aiming to do in concert with Innovate UK, Tech City UK, Tech UK, and a whole raft of sort of partners from Fried Frank, and others, is to offer tiered support to businesses at different stages of development, helping to kickstart early ones via more help and advice, connecting people within the network, and also UKTI globally, which we're striving to do through a range of programs. Now, if I can just briefly touch on some of the schemes and programs which are available to startups. I don't know what you can see on the board, on the screen there, but one way in which we're trying to be accessible to startups is through branded trade missions. So you can see up there, you've got the Great Tech Expedition. It's a concept which we created to offer a platform to startups that are seeking to explore international markets for the first time, as well as companies that are scaling up and are looking to address some of the challenges of expanding internationally. The Great Tech Expedition was actually just come back from the US, so we had about 19 tech startups in the B2B cloud software space. We took in visits to Chicago, Boston, and New York, and across the 3 destinations we had sessions with leading accelerators, in Boston like 1871, Tech Nexus, a base for growing tech companies. We had a VC pitch event in New York, which offered all the 19 companies a chance to pitch to VCs. So one of the benefits of, in passing, so one of the benefits of tech, expeditions is that they offer UK trade and investment teams in the US, for example, an opportunity to strengthen their knowledge and experience of working with startups. So, for example, the UKTI team in Chicago, up to this point, had very little engagement with startups coming from the UK. So by working on the Tech Expedition to New York program, to the US program, they were able to better understand what's coming through from the UK and also reach out to sort of valuable contacts, in Chicago. I don't know what else you can see there. So you've got I'm just going to move out of the way briefly. You've got the Tech City Global Fellowship Program, which is being launched by UK Trade and Investment with support from Tech City UK to help later stage technology companies that are scaling up. The intention is to pair them up with mentors that are based outside of the UK. The impetus behind that program is the sort of imbalance in sort of mentoring support across the sort of UK tech, tech ecosystem. There is a lot of support at the sort of early stage level and not enough at the level where companies are actually scaling up. So we are planning to, the intention is to support between 20 to 30 companies annually and pair them up with mentors that are based outside of the UK. The target is serious entrepreneurs with big exits under their belt. For example, we just recruited a chap called Rob Kev, who sold a company called Feesback for about $80 million a few years ago. So he is the sort of caliber of sort of individuals that'll be working, supporting us on that program. There is the in light of the sort of funding gap at the Series A level, UK Trade and Investment is launching a sort of digital entrepreneurs growth program, which is being led by a chap called Russell Buckley. So, the aim is to support, again, between 20 to 30 sort of growing companies with a view to improving their access to sort of Series A funding. There is the Future 50 program, which I don't know whether you can see up there, which is being run by Tech City UK with funding from BIS, that's the Business Innovation and Skills Department. The premise behind that program is to improve access to public financial markets for sort of growing, tech companies in the UK. There is also an aspiration to launch tech hubs, internationally that are linked to British embassies internationally, using a model that is working really well in Israel, where we have a sort of Israel UK Tech Hub, which is affiliated to the British Embassy in Tel Aviv. But clearly, we need to one sort of clear goal is for us to effectively coalesce these programs into a sort of coherent and sort of seamless package of support that offers a sort of clear progression route to sort of companies in the ecosystem as they evolve from startups into sort of scaling companies. And that work is currently, underway. Last but not least, the reaction from startups has been fantastic. I think, a lot of startups are naturally surprised, actually, by just how commercial UK Trade and Investment is as an agency. Please feel free to disagree with me if you, have sort of different views. So what we are sort of helping them with is for them to sort of work out where to place the balance of effort internationally and how to manage the opportunity costs that arise from sort of looking at international markets. I will respond to other questions and sort of go into detail in terms of some of the specific packages of support that I think are worth knowing about. What usually happens, actually, very briefly, is that on the back of something like the Tech Expedition to the US, the majority of companies on that sort of delegation tend to inquire more about UKTI support, on the back of those trips, because they get to sort of experience what UKTI has to offer. So I think that there is a lot to be said about just making sort of UKTI as accessible as possible, to startups.
Yeah.
I think I've used up my 5 minutes.
Thank you. No, Keith, that's really helpful. And one issue I want to come back to later in the discussion is exactly what you just called out, which is how easy are these programs to access if you're a startup? First of all, how do you find out about them? What are the qualifications? Are they relevant to the size and where you are in your journey? And so I think we'll hear a lot, especially from the entrepreneurs on stage on that. Now let's go across the pond to the other side of the equation today, and that's looking at John. John, you have nearly 25 years as a commercial officer representing the U.S. government, and you've served around the globe. You've helped, obviously, major big companies with their globalization strategies. And now here as a minister counselor for commercial affairs, I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about the types of services that the U.S. government has to help American startups expand to the U.K., and also talk about whether there's any opportunity for the U.S. government to be of assistance to that reverse of the equation, right? UK and European companies are looking to penetrate the U.S. markets.
Okay, thank you very much. As was mentioned, I'm the head of the commercial section at the U.S. Embassy. And what do we do? Up until October 2011, all we did was promote U.S. exports around the world. It was in 2011, October, that President Obama, you see pictured here, came aboard and started the initiative, launched Select USA, and that is really to promote investment in the United States. I think in the tech sector specifically, I think we can do great stuff. We're just building on what we've done this last year, but I think because of what UKTI does, we're sort of the flip side of what they do. And it's actually in the tech sector, you can hear from Keith's comments, what they see as sort of tech exports from the UK to the United States, we see as potential investment, because it's all about job creation. So if we can find a way, and we have, I think, over the last year, been working with UKTI in certain areas, because it is that area where our interests intersect, because we're all about jobs and growth. UKTI wants to create jobs and growth on this side of the pond. We want to create jobs and growth on the other side of the pond, and the tech sector is that one area where we intersect. I think if you look at ICT, R&D, 55% of the global research and development happens in the United States. 40% of the global tech purchases are in the United States. Your presence here today, this is a global innovation forum, but obviously many of you are interested or already have launched and scaled in the United States. And so you obviously have an interest because you realize we've got a market of 310 million there. And so that's of interest to you, and you're interested in going there to dip your toe in the water and see what opportunities we might have for you. And so since October 2011, we've really been working as a government to promote FDI in the United States, to promote companies that want to come to the United States to open up their businesses, again, for that interest in creating jobs and growth. We have a number of tools that we have available. Probably the best place for you to go to start is selectusa.gov. It'll take you to a website that has a wide range of information. A couple of the things that I'm going to highlight here for you, but I think it really is worth your time if you're interested in the United States, going on there and surfing around and identifying what we might have available in terms of information. We have sort of an ombudsman role that we play. Companies, especially the small, medium-sized startups or small, medium-sized companies coming to the United States, trying to navigate through the federal bureaucracy, trying to figure out, okay, now where is there something that can actually help me do my business? And as we heard from my comments previously about visas, a lot of it's visas, immigration, and more visas. Those are the concerns. And we actually are in the process of trying to coordinate with folks on the other side of the Atlantic, the private sector, the tech community that is really interested in opening up the tech visa for entrepreneurs to come in and launch and scale their businesses in the U.S. So while we're not driving that initiative, we are in touch with them, and we're trying to provide, a facilitative role in terms of trying to make that happen and trying to alert them to the kind of interest there is in places like the United Kingdom and other markets around Europe, Middle East and Africa and elsewhere that are interested in going to the United States to launch and scale. And what we're trying to do is to capture the number of jobs that we're losing by not having a tech entrepreneur visa or an easier process that tech entrepreneurs can get into the United States. So again, while we're not driving that, we do have a role in terms of just trying to facilitate a dialogue between them and the tech entrepreneurs here in the UK. So the second part of this quad slide is something called a cluster mapping tool. And if you go onto selectusa.gov, you'll see there's other resources, and under other resources, there's links to all sorts of different tools that are available. Some of them federal, some of them state and local, but I would really recommend that you go onto selectusa.gov and check those out. But if you go to the cluster mapping tool, which was actually developed by the Department of Commerce in conjunction with the Harvard Business School, basically what it is it highlights 51 traded clusters in the United States by sector that are responsible for 36% of all employment. And also local clusters, 16 local clusters that are responsible for about 64% of all employment. So if you go in there, the traded clusters is probably where you're going to focus, because that's sort of the larger companies that are involved in trade of some sort. The local clusters are more the mom and pop shops, the smaller businesses that exist in the United States that aren't involved in trade. But again, if that's what you're trying to access, if that's what your application or your startup is focused on, then that might be a useful tool for you. But the idea is to go on and play with it, because it is a phenomenal tool. Again, developed by the Harvard Business School together with Census and the National Economic Analysis Bureau of the Department of Commerce to try to come together and put all of the data that exists to use for companies like yours that are trying to figure out where you want to go in the United States. Because when you look at some of the states in the United States, their economies are as large as many countries around the world. And so obviously, you might think, well, I've got to be in Silicon Valley, or I got to be in New York, or I got to be in Austin, Texas, or I got to be in Atlanta, Georgia, or wherever. But really, you should take a look at the cluster mapping tool, because depending upon where your potential partners are, or depending upon where your potential customers are, that may drive where you should be in the United States. Now, we are Select USA. We're not Select US, Silicon Valley, or Select New York, or Select. We must remain geographically neutral. So if you come to us and you ask for help in identifying where you should go, we're going to send you the cluster mapping tool, because I can't tell you where it is that you should go in the United States. Now, if you identify that and you come to us and you ask for help, then we can play a role there, and I'll explain that in just a second. But if you look at the map for this, and Richard Stambridge, he's the head of our tech industry stream. Richard, would you stand up a second? Richard can talk to you in more detail about the cluster mapping tool, but this one, the slide that you see right there, this is a search that we did based on communication services, and this is the number of establishments in the United States related to communication services. So if you're potential partners or your potential end users are obviously related to communication services, and you take a look at this map, you think, these are probably the places that I need to be. And so once you identify those places, and you can see the places that are darker blue than those that are lighter blue or white, then you would go to the second or the third quad, the second slide there about the Select USA website. And so if you go into selectusa.gov and you scroll down, this will be there. As we are geographically neutral, and we have information, and we can facilitate information about business incentives that are offered by the federal government, and benefits offered by the federal government, and grants offered by the federal government. If you want to find out specifically what's offered by the various states, you just go into that map and you click on the state, and it'll bring you to the state's website for its investment promotion agency, and it will give you outline everything that state has to offer you as a business, as a startup, for launching your business in that state. So again, selectusa.gov, you'll find the cluster mapping tool under resources, and on the first page you find the map there, and these are, again, great tools that are available for you. And then finally, on the last slide, you can see the Select USA Summit. We did one back in 2013. October 31st, November 1st, we had 1,300 people that came for the summit. There were 2,000 people on the waiting list. And so what we've done is we've opened it up again March 23rd, 24th, I believe, in Washington, D.C. will be the next Select USA Summit. It's really all the highest level U.S. government officials that are there, again, working together to promote the U.S. as the premier destination for investment. They're there to talk to you. Corporate executives there to talk to you. We'll have representatives from all the various states to talk to you. So if that's of interest to you, go on to selectusasummit.com. And finally, with regard to the programs that we have at the embassy to promote the launching and scaling of tech startups in the United States, here's our handle, Select USA Tech. I would encourage you to follow that, and any new information that we have coming up, whether it be about a tech entrepreneur visa or about future events that we have. We run these boot camps together with a series of partners. We've done them here at Level 39 back in March. We did one in Dublin in June, in Edinburgh in September, and just this past Tuesday in Belfast. We do these sort of one-day boot camps for tech entrepreneurs looking to go to the United States to provide them with all the information they need to know before they go. And so if you're interested in those kinds of events, follow us on Select USA Tech. All right? Thank you all very much.
Great, thank you. I'm eager to kind of hear some customer feedback, right, about this tool over time too, and whether folks in the room now know about this, start to use it. I think if I were the U.S. government, I would be really open to hearing that customer feedback, because at the end of the day, you build a product, aren't you? And it needs to be relevant. So that's really great. It's news to me, actually. It's fantastic. Let's turn to Bethany. You're the founder and CEO of Technology Will Save Us, which I'm sure everyone in the audience is eager to hear actually about your product. But you're now down in the trenches. You have 20 people, and you're really focused on global scale at this point. Can you kind of talk us through the immediate pain points when you've got to move a product across borders, you've got to think about hiring local teams, and what are the intersection points for you with government, with regulations? What are the things that have been actually smooth, and what are the things that have presented you with problems?
So we're Technology Will Save Us, and we make DIY technology kits to help families, teachers, and young people make, play, code, and invent with technology. So this is one of our kits. This is the DIY Gamer. You basically solder your own game console, and then you make 2 games it comes with, Pong and Snake, that were programmed by a 15-year-old that did a work placement with us. You learn how the inputs and outputs work, and then you go through step-by-step animation and then learning programming to design and invent your own games. So all of our kits basically take you through those kinds of processes. And we design them around everyday life themes like gardening, cycling, gaming, because we think people learn more when they care about what they're going to make. So that's the context. That's what we do. We design, assemble, and fulfill all of our kits from our mini factory in Hackney down the street from Sugru. So there's this kind of little community that's actually quite growing with kind of London hardware kind of businesses in East London, which is quite exciting. So there's lots of pain points. There's, 20 people. We don't have enough resources to do half of the things we need to do. Similar to kind of what Sugru was talking about, from the beginning, we've been global. So we launched with interns packing kits on my kitchen table, a Shopify website, a blog, and immediately we were selling. 50% of our sales are in the US, the rest is in the UK. We basically have sold to 127 countries, and this is just through e-commerce to start with. We now have shops and online marketplaces that sell our products as well. And the biggest pain points are the specificity, I think, of industries. So we are education and electronics. There's all different kinds of regulations in those 2 industries. And we're not just one of them, we're the intersection. So that's really complicated. So from an electronics perspective, beyond just the regulations, the CE marking, et cetera, that we have to go through, navigating that space and getting the right kind of support. And the advice is varied. You go to the CE marking organizations and they tell you, oh, you don't need CE marking because you're a kit, so you don't need markings. But that's not what retailers tell us. Retailers say you have to have markings. So it's navigating the different regulations and support to try and make the right decisions so that you can actually reach the marketplaces and, quite frankly, fulfill the demand. Like, we're playing with this really scary space of not being able to fulfill demand all the time. Because we have demand, we need to make sure that we can actually fulfill that from a supply chain perspective, as well as actually in the markets that we need to be selling in. Other pain points, I think, are things like customs. That's just delightfully complicated. So one of our first US retailers is MoMA Design Store, which is fantastic. So they made this really big order. We were super excited. We ship thousands of kits to the US, and we find out that the customs code for our particular product has changed the day before. So it's stuck in customs. Our sales manager is on the phone trying to find what the customs code is. We don't have a particular group focusing on regulations and customs. It's our sales manager or our procurement manager or me, quite frankly. Yeah. So it's navigating all those things that are constantly in flux, that we don't know are happening kind of behind the scenes of kind of trade and infrastructure. So I think customs and regulations are the ones that kind of rise to my surface at the moment. I did want to say a few things about kind of government support and our experience with that. So it was great to hear what Keith was saying about the kind of different things that are on offer, because we've almost had all of them, which is great. So we've done SEIS, and now we're in the process of doing EIS. That's been amazing. We have an incredible group of angels that has not just given us capital, but has made incredible introductions that are actively participating in growing the business from support and advisory positions, which is, we couldn't have done it without that kind of perspective. We are doing R&D tax credits for the second time, which again is hugely supportive. We didn't even know that was on offer until one of the people in our community kind of mentioned it. And now, you know, we're eligible for almost 50 grand of tax credit, which is freaking fantastic. And that being a part of our kind of cash flow understanding is actually really, really helpful. We also, I recently went on a trade mission with UKTI and Silicon Valley Comes to the UK. So 15 female founders were taken to Silicon Valley to meet with different kinds of entrepreneurs, investors, Silicon Valley Bank. We met with Greylock. We had all different kinds of really intimate, honest conversations with quite scaled and scaling businesses. And I would say that for us and in our experiences, beyond just the kind of financial support and access that I think government feels like it's doing in the UK, I think it's introductions and community. I think the things that has been the most useful for us is talking to other entrepreneurs, talking to other businesses that are in really similar spaces to us, because a lot of the challenges we're going through, they've either gone through or they're going through it, and the kinds of things that we are able to share and learn really fast is invaluable. So, you know, on the Silicon Valley trip, I meet someone's, you know, a producer that's actually helping one of our kind of partners, helping them actually fulfill some of their orders in the US. That becomes our supplier immediately. It's those kinds of relationships and those kinds of kind of shared experiences that I think, at least in early stage businesses, is really, really helpful. And I guess the other thing I would say about some of the services that I've kind of seen from UKTI is that I think that this word startup is used really broadly, right? It's everything from 5 people to 200 people. And I saw that on our trip to Silicon Valley. There were people that had just started a business. There were 2 people. 2 businesses that were already scaled in 3 different countries with 400 people around the world. Those challenges are really different. And from what I've seen from some of the support structures, it feels like a lot of the support is maybe for 30 to 50 plus, as opposed to 5 to 20. And I think that's a really different stage in growth and the challenges that businesses have to face. I don't know what we're going to have to face when we're 50 to 100, I can imagine. But the things we're facing right now are faster. We know less than we would if we had more senior team members. There's all kinds of challenges we're facing that I haven't felt like the government services have been specifically about those needs, but maybe I haven't seen all the services out there. But that's kind of the experience. And I think the communities that we belong to are definitely the ones that are most valuable. So we belong to the London Hardware Collective, which is a collection of East London hardware businesses in kind of Hackney, Dalston area. We meet every 6 weeks in different people's businesses. We invite guest speakers. It's incredibly valuable. The resources we've shared are really, really, really helpful. The London Tech Advocates is incredibly helpful as well. Again, from a networking perspective, but also from an access perspective to different kinds of organizations that are actually trying to understand the needs of startups and create services to fulfill those needs, whether that's recruitment or whether that's actually finding investment. Because I think the needs of startups are very different and very varied, and businesses want to understand that. They just need more feedback on how to do that. So those 2 groups in particular, I think, are incredibly valuable to me specifically, and to, I think, our business.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to address one point because I think one thing that's probably, unfortunately, a best kept secret is that UKTI in the United States and commercial service throughout the world, we have a tremendous network of specialists at embassies and consulates. I mean, I can tell you on these sort of the customs and the regulatory questions, you are not alone. I mean, you've got an amazing UKTI team in New York and around the United States that when you run into those kinds of problems, you don't have to address those yourself. I mean, you can go to the UKTI representatives, as we would expect U.S. SMEs coming to us here at the embassy to get their stuff out of customs, to help them understand, you know, what do they do now that they're facing something has a different code than it did the day before yesterday. I mean, you have support. I mean, not just in terms of the promotion, the trade missions, and so on. There's a great UKTI team back in the United States that can help you.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, that's one of the first pieces of advice that I always give to startups who are going global is to talk to the consulates and the embassies in the countries that you're there, either where your company's based or, you know, perhaps where one of your employees is from. That is critical. When I'm, you know, one of my roles at Intuit is I help Intuit look at where are the markets that we're going to put people on the ground, and those are the first people that I go to because usually the consular staff have been there for a few years. Some of them are local hires, right? So they're not moving around every 2 years, and they do have great connections. So don't always assume that government just doesn't think like an entrepreneur. You know, that's their job is actually to open commercial doors, and so I think that's a really great call out, John. Yeah.
I can second that. So in the US, UKTI has 9 offices and 120 staff. All but 5 are locally recruited. So
Yeah.
just to second John's point, there is support on the ground, not just in the US, but in most global markets.
Yeah, that's great. All right, let's turn to tech. A majority of your career has actually been focused on this very issue and creating connections between London startups and New York startups. And so you have a really strong understanding of what it's like to go on that global journey. You are obviously director at Techstars, so you have companies that you guys are invested in. And so I'm sure you're seeing themes across the entrepreneurship space. Can you maybe highlight, I would say, maybe 3 kind of broad public policy issues that you see come up time and time again? And if you had a magic wand, how would you fix those?
If I had a magic wand. Yeah, I wish, actually, with these 2 guys, perhaps maybe I do have a little bit more of a magic wand.
Yeah.
So just to give some context, I originally worked in the Techstars office. So Techstars is one of the largest accelerators in the world. I see some of my competitors out there in the crowd. But I originally worked in the New York office before coming to London. And before that, I was actually an early stage entrepreneur in London. So I know what it's like being an entrepreneur here. So I think kind of a large public policy issues that we've experienced. So as an accelerator, we invest in companies every 3 months. And so we typically invest to 10 to 12 early stage companies every 3 months. In London, we've operated for 2 cycles now. We're actually starting our 3rd. So we've run through about 24 companies. And in New York, I've seen 12 companies. So I'm just going to juxtapose the 2. I think from the UK perspective, I think broadly speaking, I'm sure it's been an issue this morning, but it's about visas, right? And I think it's not the fact that there are no visas. I think the fact that you have an entrepreneur visa is absolutely awesome. I came in here with an entrepreneur visa. The U.S. currently, I think, still kind of stuck in kind of entrepreneur visa quagmire. So I think the fact that there is an entrepreneur, I think is great. I think it's the pace, oftentimes, and also the difficulty of the whole submission process, which is, I think, the issue. So one of our startups from our last batch are about to raise a couple million in financing. Exactly the same thing. San Francisco entrepreneur, been through a couple of times, sold his last business, came here, went through the cohort, loved London. You know, despite the rain, despite the cloudy weather, said, hey, I'm going to move from San Francisco to London with my family and start a business here. But the visa, it was a very hairy situation where it was almost, they weren't sure whether they would be kicked out, yeah. Right? So I think it's just and I think, you know, there were obviously kind of the legal issues as well. It was where is the regulation? And the regulation's always changing, constantly changing as well. So I think it's that. The pace, the change, I think, which makes it, I think, very, very confusing for the entrepreneurs. Another issue, I think, is the discrepancy between kind of financing rules. So I don't know if that issue has been kind of addressed. So in the U.S., if you want to invest, you have to be an accredited investor. So what that means is you have to have your annual salary needs to be more than $200,000, or you have to have a net worth of higher than $1 million. In the UK, it's actually much more relaxed, right? So SEIS, EIS, and other kind of different schemes, but just any person can be an investor. So I think there were particular issues when this entrepreneur was trying to raise financing. So great, UK pool is awesome and fantastic, lots of money, but they're not necessarily accredited. They're based out of the US, they're incorporated in the US, and so they're beholden to some of those rules in the US, but the investor pool, are not beholden to UK investor rules, but in some ways they're beholden to the US investor rules. So I think at least some sort of reconciliation of that discrepancy of what an investor really looks like and what an investor can be, I think would be great. I think that one of the issues, I think another issue that we see, I think is eventually, let's talk about like in terms of the legal and the accounting side. So when you're raising financing, in one country, I think that's great. If you're raising, but then there are always kind of FX transfer fees. And if it weren't for TransferWise, I think it would be very difficult. I think the currency fluctuations are pretty steep. And depending on what the terms are in the beginning and when you actually, trying to get the money in the bank, that can really going to change the decimal points quite a bit. So I think the transfer markets, I think, need to be a little bit friendlier. Again, I think TransferWise, I think, definitely helps. But at least some sort of a little bit more, I think, more products and more services or more marketplaces in the general marketplace to do these kind of currency transfers, I think would be great. I think regulations in terms of banking, setting up banking, like startup banking, basic banking services is actually not easy. Here you have to have a business plan. You have to have a ton of stuff that you have to prove. And it's hard. In the U.S., it's much easier. So again, I think regulations-wise, I think that should be solved. I think the last issue, I think, is the domiciling and re-domiciling. So if you're domiciled in the UK, I'm going to get this wrong, but if you're domiciled in the UK and you go to the US, I think there are certain tax implications that I think are more preferable than if you go the other side around. I think that's not particularly clear if you're, especially in the early stage, right? So when you're early stage, to your point, when you're early stage, you don't think about these issues. That there are oftentimes later stage issues. But yet, all the startups are operating in a global environment. Everyone's an MNC now. Everyone. Whether you're a one-man shop or a two-man shop, you are an MNC. So I think just more clarity on tax issues, I think, is incredibly, incredibly important, especially if you're, I think at some point, the capital markets are still in the U.S., right? Let's just, Series A, Series B, they're going to be in the U.S. So I think later stage people, later stage mentors say, these are the issues that you will encounter and you should be aware of, I think could potentially solve the problem.
Yeah. One of the themes that I think is interesting that both of the entrepreneurs highlighted is that perhaps government has a role in harmonizing standards, right? Because what you said was, I have problems around moving, goods across different borders. There's custom regulations. They change overnight. I have no idea how to understand that. One of the things that Tax said is that the banking regulations are different in every country. I mean, big tech companies also face different standards on how to move data across borders, right? That's really important to a startup and to a big company. And, I think some of the interesting things that trade groups are doing and trade associations and even groups like the Global Innovation Forum are trying to have those dialogues so that countries can sit at the table, governments can sit at the table and say, hey, let's not make it harder for our economies to grow. Let's make it easier and make it easier on businesses. Tech, were you going to say something else, or was it John? Yeah.
No, actually, going exactly to that point, I don't know if we're going to talk about it on this panel or not, but the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, anybody ever hear of it? I mean, basically, it's the United States and the EU are negotiating currently. I think they just finished their 7th round, if I'm not mistaken, of negotiations on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And I think a lot of people have the misconception or misperception that it's about big companies. This is all about big companies, where frankly, it's really going to benefit the small companies, because it's those non-tariff barriers that disproportionately disadvantage small companies. Because the big companies have the wherewithal, they've got the lawyers, they've got the staff that can help them work around some of these non-tariff barriers, but it's actually the SMEs, these companies who are trying to deal with multiple regulations and standards and so on, who are the ones who are more severely impacted, negatively impacted by this. So I think, when we talk about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, it's getting a lot of bad press because those who don't want it have a louder voice than those of us who are trying to build towards this. But I think really it's for startups, it's for the SMEs, where if you have the same standard, you have the same regulation between the United States and the European Union, think about that, how much that would facilitate, the work that you're doing in any sector. And so I think as we watch these negotiations go forward, I really would, emphasize and ask you to recognize that this isn't about the big companies. I mean, 99% of companies in the European Union and the United States are SMEs. Right. And so it's those 99% that are really going to benefit by TTIP if we can ever get it negotiated and passed and ratified.
Yeah, I would just second that. There are groups out there that are increasingly representing the startup voice in policy. Kodak, I think, might be in the room. I don't know if I see Guy. No, I think that that's the right place to make your voice heard, because people say, trade agreements, that takes years. Who cares about trade agreements? But actually, if we start making the business case to the people who are at the table, this actually can have an impact on the day-to-day moving of your goods across borders. Tech, you had something?
Yeah, actually, this conversation inspired me. If the respective governments can actually have a big thing in the startup space is minimal viable product, right? If there's minimal viable government, yes, that would be awesome. Just one sheet. If you're operating a hardware company, these are the things that you have to take a look at, right? Custom plot, whatever it may be, visas. These are the things, because you could. If you had that one sheet, maybe it is accessible. I don't know. Maybe there is a one sheet. But if there were a one sheet, minimum viable government, I think that would help out a lot. Because I think oftentimes you run into the problem where I think the trade organizations try to cater to multiple organizations and multiple sizes, and so you're not particularly trying to solve for that. Yeah. Tiny little person.
Absolutely, and it's about getting a product out early to test it, right? That's completely opposite to how government operates, because government is very risk adverse, right? They have to think about all the scenarios, and actually, by the way, big companies are like this too. So I think that's a really good point. And then as government are putting out opportunities on the table, really to think about it from that perspective. Keith?
I think it's the dispersal of that minimum viable sheet that could be a problem, because the landscape is highly fragmented with multiple players and sort of varying ecosystem. But I think as the tech ecosystem across the UK consolidates, partly through accelerators, I think over time it will be efficient, I think, for sort of government to engage with with startups.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think going back to SMEs again and TTIP, I think it's important that startups, that SMEs, that you make your views be known, to your associations, to trade associations, to folks who are participating and providing, input to the negotiators on TTIP, because I know that there is going to be a special chapter set aside within TTIP on SME issues, and there's actually an SME committee that is being established to oversee the implementation, eventual implementation of TTIP. And so those kinds of issues, the wish list of issues that you have as startups, as SMEs, ensure that you get that to those who represent your interests, before your various governments, because I think it's critical that they've got that input from you.
Absolutely. I want to turn it to the audience, because thanks to those who filled out a quick feedback form ahead of the event, we have a little bit of understanding that there's a lot of startups in the room who have some very tangible problems and moving across borders. And so I'd love to hear from the audience. Are there governments out there besides the United States and besides the UK who've been particularly helpful to you? We hear a lot about Startup Chile, kind of in the world that we operate in. We hear a lot about Canada, and I'd like to hear some points on that. Go ahead.
Thank you. So my name is Joseph Dunn, and I'm co-founder of Babelverse. And Babelverse, I guess, is a very truly global startup by nature. So I just want to talk about Startup Chile and governments around the world that are taking a slightly different approach, a less commercial approach, I would say, probably a more of a community approach. And Bethany mentioned that helping entrepreneurs is vital and crucial. So Babelverse was founded in Athens in Greece by a French man and an English man. And we were solving the problem of language barriers so we can communicate, and we needed an access to an interpreter. So that's the basis. We provide quick access to an interpreter. It's like Uber for language, I would say. And anyway, in Greece, we were there, actually, and we didn't have access to capital, we didn't have access to a network, an ecosystem, anything like that. And I actually co-organized a TEDx conference in Greece because I wanted to create my own ecosystem. But what's more importantly is I caught wind of a program happening in 2010 called Startup Chile. And the idea of it is to attract world-class teams, individuals, entrepreneurs, to invest in people rather than ideas. So the minimum viable product, this is what's important, and provide an area where an environment where you can basically go to a place with no strings attached. That was important. Someone was mentioning visas earlier. I think it was Danny saying that there's a discrepancy between the family man and the individual who rents a flat in London, or in my case, Athens, who is ultimately pretty poor and needs a way out. So we had this great idea. We were accepted in Startup Chile, and the process of actually getting to Santiago and taking part was streamlined by the government in Chile. So they gave us pretty much immediate access to a residence permit, which was valid for 2 years, temporary residence permit that after 2 years could result in a permanent residence permit. So that was very quick. Also, they gave us access to a grant, which was $40,000. We got around the taxation issue by the fact that the grant was circumvented somehow, that 10% of it was taken away every time they reimbursed it at the end of the month. It was a reimbursement system, so you had to actually spend to get the grant. So not every single startup used the funding available. And I think it's a homogeneous society that was importing individuals from around the world to create an ecosystem and change the culture. That was the ambition of Startup Chile. And now they're on their 12th round, and I think if you look at Crunchbase, I think they're the second incubator that has invested in around 700 startups now, underneath, second to Sequoia, I think. So it's a pretty huge program that has ridden the waves of politics as well. But I think their main focus was that the entrepreneurs will create their own environment, and they will help and assist each other without hands-on, more hands-off approach. And they're the government, and that's what they told us. We're the government. What do you need? We'll implement it. Simple as that, really. It's pretty impressive.
Is there any, that's really helpful, and I think it highlights a different approach, right? I think we're debating what's the role of government, and that's a slightly different view on it, and maybe Chile's looking more about creating easy access in communities. Are there any
Lindsay,
other folks?
I just wanted to just say briefly, I was down in Santiago earlier this month, and so I got a tour of Startup Chile, and they presented, their executive director presented at a conference on Latin America startups, and the interesting thing is they're trading off of the deficiency, particularly in the United States, to be able to grant visas and deal with this visa and immigration issue. They've got these big PowerPoint slides where they talk about, come to Chile because we're going to give you a visa in a way that the United States won't. And so there are other countries that are sort of using our deficiencies in public policies to their advantage.
Another question that I kind of wanted to go back to is the issue of privacy. We talked about in the last panel, I think it was Katie who said, at the end of the day, we're small teams, and so data is king. We need to be able to know where our customers are coming from and their decisions. And in order to get that, we need to have access to data, right? The tools that increasingly social media platforms are offering you as an entrepreneur, e-commerce platforms, et cetera. But I think government also has a viewpoint on how data should be analyzed, collected, and moved. And so I just have, I especially like to ask entrepreneurs, do you think about privacy policy? I mean, the European view is a lot different, let's say, than the US view, than, let's say, the India view on data. So how do you think about those regulations?
I mean, we're starting to think about it a lot more now as we scale. We've focused, obviously, very specifically on our traction in the UK, and I don't know how many people know about what's happening in education, but the UK became the first country in the world to basically require programming as part of the curriculum. So it launched in September, which is great for us. We didn't know that was going to happen, but that creates an even bigger need than what we imagined from a kind of demand perspective. And as we begin to enter into educational scenarios and really kind of build digital and physical tools, privacy is becoming increasingly more important. And we're not there yet as far as like our opinion and how we're going to navigate it, but we definitely have an opinion on that. The tools that have existed in the past, particularly in the education sector, have not really addressed that in a way that allow those tools to grow beyond education. And our focus is not solely on education. It's on shops and schools, because we think that learning happens in and outside of the classroom. And I think as we begin to build more digital and physical tools that integrate, privacy and those kinds of regulations are going to increasingly become a huge challenge for us, or an opportunity.
Yeah.
So we're not there yet, but I can see them on the horizon, particularly because we're in these two spaces.
Yeah, that feedback that you just shared is something that I hear a lot from our startup customers and also from the big companies that we operate and partner with, is that oftentimes privacy laws don't move at the same speed and the same pace as innovation, right? And so, government may take years to debate, the GDPR here in Europe, but by then some of those rules might be irrelevant because some of the tools have outpaced that. And so I think what I hear a lot from entrepreneurs is that there needs to be a dialogue, and industry needs to help kind of drive that opinion, and it needs to be at the table with government who are making these laws. Did anybody else have a view on kind of privacy and data issues?
Suffice it to say that open data is an explicit government objective here in the UK, and I think there is a significant drive to open up public data to entrepreneurs in the UK, and the establishment of the ODI in the past few years has sort of cemented the UK at the forefront of sort of open data. I suppose another point to mention in relation to sort of privacy is that sort of global cultures have sort of varying views on sort of personal data. So on our last trip to Brazil, I think I had Bebelves, I think he was with us. I think what we discovered there was that Brazilians don't attach much value to their sort of personal data. But at the same time, there is significant political pressure in Brazil to localize sort of data. So I think this whole sort of data issue is sort of replete with issues and risk, I think, for startups. And I think, you sort of urge them to seek advice, to support, their plans to scale into markets which may have onerous policies around data privacy.
One question I wanted to ask Tech as well is, we talked about earlier some of the government programs that are out there, right? R&D tax credits, et cetera. Can you talk us through how easy those are to either, how startups discover them, and also the process of application?
To the point of just privacy, I was going to jump into
please.
privacy. We actually, I think our startup is so early stage where, I think the whole conversation about privacy just gets thrown out the window. Yeah. So the more private you are, I think it's an opposite of really kind of the early stage startup culture. So it's really not something that they're thinking about. And if the potential customers or users that they have are in the US or broadly US based, I think usually there's an alignment of privacy. I think where it starts to get into the picture is if these early stage startups want to operate increasingly in Europe, where there are these onerous laws. But we haven't really seen that much of it. To the point of where do we seek these resources? These two guys are awesome. So I think we've got great mentors that help us looking through the space. We definitely try to engage with immigration lawyers. We definitely have Free Frank coming in as well to let us know about what is the latest conversation about immigration. What is the latest conversation about domicile. So I think we rely on subject matter experts. I think to John's point, these trade organizations are built to have specialists on board, right? Yeah. They are up to date. And so I think we try to tap that as much as possible because as entrepreneurial as we are, to try to Google everything and try to look. We just know it's much more efficient to go through the resources that we have available.
Right.
And whether it's a philosophical stance to say we don't want to use government, if that is the most efficient way to use it, we should be entrepreneurs and go to the government.
Can I ask a really tangible question? How do you find people like John and Keith as an entrepreneur? You work at Techstars, so obviously you have an open door to them. But what about someone here who maybe not at an incubator? Do they Google these guys' names? How do they find these awesome people?
Yeah, I think definitely. So when I was an entrepreneur, go to meetups, right?
Yeah.
Go to meetups. One, it's the most efficient way of aggregation, right? Keith, I've seen Keith multiple times. In fact, this is the second time I've actually seen Keith in London. I usually see Keith in New York. Funny enough, I've seen it 3 times in New York and only twice here in London. So go to these meetups, right? Oftentimes, I think these players will be here and will be present to talk about these particular issues. Google's your best friend. So taking a look at, I think when we're looking at immigration issues, right, visas issues, I remember calling up your embassy, right? Calling up your local embassy, trying to figure out where you can get an answer. I think those are the 2 resources that I would suggest, basically Google and meetups. Actually, a third one, reach out to other entrepreneurs. Someone's gone through this problem before. Don't think you're the only one person. You're the only person going through the problem, and so think through some other entrepreneur that's gone through this particular problem, and oftentimes they can give you an intro.
I'm going to turn to the audience in the last kind of couple of minutes that we have. Are there questions or different perspectives? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Joanna. I run Bakelight, which is audience engagement over mobile apps at live events. Thank you. We're based here in East London. We're a creative technology company, so we've started actively engaging the US, especially on the West Coast. We've got a chairman in LA, and we've got an investor in Silicon Valley. We've raised SEIS funding, which was amazing, really helpful. We're now running into some interesting issues with looking at the US and the potential in the future to perhaps convert into a US company, as investors, VCs in particular, are quite favourable for. However, I'm interested to know your thoughts, Keith, around because we have tax incentivized investment within the company. As far as I can see, any conversion then causes issues for our shareholders with that tax incentivization. Just wondering your thoughts about how SEIS helps companies who actively do want to raise in the US and go to the US quite swiftly.
I don't think I'm the right person to respond to that question, really. It's probably Dan in the audience, or someone who actually invests in startups that are looking to scale to the US. But I know that SEIS throws up some issues when companies are looking to flip and sort of set up a sort of top core in the US and a subsidiary in the UK for the stated purpose of accessing capital in the US. It's probably time we arrange to sort of talk around that issue, because it is a recurring theme that I think needs to be addressed properly.
Yeah,
but
I just raise it because it is affecting, I understand, but it is now affecting quite a few of my generation startups. So we went through incubator, we pretty much got the first round of probably SEIS funding, and now we're starting to get to that point where it's becoming quite a tangible issue.
There's a real debate right now going on, I would say, in the U.S. as to whether or not UK companies coming into the U.S. should be flipping into a U.S. topco or coming into the U.S. As a subsidiary of the UK parent. A lot of this ends up being tax-driven. The corporate tax rate in the UK is about half of what it is in the U.S. Historically, though, U.S. VCs would insist that a company flip into a UK company flip into a U.S. topco coming into the States. Investors are increasingly seeing the potential benefits of keeping the UK topco because of that tax benefit. Maybe not even for immediate reasons, but down the road, the universe of potential M&A buyers who have cash offshore outside the U.S. ends up being greater. So it's something that's being debated right now, and I agree with Keith. It's probably time for maybe a community discussion around the issue.
I'll talk to Gerard, the CEO of TechCity UK, and see if something can be done about it.
In the middle, we have one more question.
My name is Aaron Roseland, and I'm with the Canadian High Commission, and I've heard Canada mentioned a few times, so in atypical fashion, I'll say something about Canada. I think Canada actually is, I don't know if aggressive is the right word to say, but I think we are really trying to reinforce that we are open, we're an open society, from a couple different perspectives. One, from belonging. We have 2 new visa programs. One that gets a 2-year work permit for senior leaders in companies, and that's processed in 15 days. And we also have another startup visa program that matches startup companies with venture capital as well as a visa to come to Canada. I think the second aspect is borders. We have, the US is currently negotiating TTIP. We already have the comprehensive trade agreement with Europe that when it comes into force in 2016, on the day that it comes into force, 98% of all tariffs will be eliminated on that day. So we're quite excited about that, and that also will enable free movement of people and goods and services. And then, of course, we have NAFTA with the US and Mexico. And between Canada and the US right now, it's $1 billion of trade a day. So very open borders that people often think of Canada as being another place that's somewhat isolated, but it's not at all. And I think the third aspect is business. In the diplomatic corps, for example, myself, many of the diplomats are hired from outside, and our jobs are dependent upon results. Every 3 years I have to recompete for my job. If I don't get it, if I don't have results, somebody else will have that, and I don't have a guaranteed job. So it really is what I would say an intrapreneurial environment, and if you're looking for assistance or information, governments tend to be the place to go nowadays.
Great, thanks. We'll take one more question from the front, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Thank you. It's unfortunately more common than a question, but my name is Emmanuel Adam. I'm with British American Business, a large business organization based here in London and New York. And thank you so much for 2 really great panels. And I'm actually, unfortunately, quite fascinated with those stories I hear about trade barriers, customs or banking regulation, etc. Just wanted to mention one thing. We have been traveling around the UK for now 18 months, trying to picking up exactly these stories. And now we have reached a point where we are thinking about maybe putting together a report that we would like to send to not only our membership, which is more than 300 in London alone, but also to government across the EU and the US. And if one of your companies, and I would love to talk to you maybe at some point, Bethany Tuck, if one of your companies is interested to be featured or maybe just to tell us the problems they had or the barriers they face, we would be happy to include you in this and give you the visibility that would come with such a report. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. I think some of the interesting themes we heard over and over again, I just want to summarize. We need to fix immigration. The countries that don't fix it now are going to lose out to the countries who do fix it. Number 2, I think if you are a startup, you have to go find the Johns and the Keiths of the world inside of government. And like others, and including the startup said, there are trained diplomats and commercial officers who can be an advocate for your business in any country in the world. But on the flip side, government also has to do a better job advertising these programs, right? You didn't know about the R&D tax credit. I can't tell you how many times our customers say that. And I just think the last thing I would say is I would urge that, startups, big companies, and government to continue to sit at the table, because the rules that are being debated today are going to impact your company tomorrow when you're ready to start caring about things like privacy and customs. And so I just want to thank everyone for this conversation and get excited for lunch and for our very special keynote. So thank you.